Welcome to yet another episode of Rummaging through stories, ideas, and thoughts. I'm your host, Vishmi Dharmasiri. And today my guest is a very special person. She was a very good friend back from my school days. She is none other than Vishmi Dharmasiri. She is currently majoring in English language at the Faculty of Arts, University of Colombo. Hi, Vishmi.
Hi, Amaya. Nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure to have you, actually. So, Vishmi recommended me the book The Stranger, written by Albert Camus. Am I right?
Albert Camus. So it's the French pronunciation, but yes.
Has it ever bothered you whether the world and our lives has a meaning at all? If yes, how can we find it? Today, we are rummaging through this centuries-old question with the Nobel Prize-winning novel, The Stranger. When Vishmi recommended me the book, The Stranger, it was a very different experience for me. I couldn't literally put down the book until I finished reading it. I read it within like 1 or 2 days. It was so interesting.
Yes. What you said is correct. I totally agree with you because this is not the typical kind of book that you come across, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not this. So if you're the kind of reader looking for the thrill and the romance and the adventure in sort of a life-changing, problem-solving story, Camus is not that type of writer. He's not that. He writes in a very real sense that it would not even usually qualify as fiction. It's barely a story, but
yes.
It's very shockingly keeping us to it. Like we can't just put it down. What you said is correct. Yes.
So this book, The Stranger, falls under the genre of philosophical novels. If there are listeners who still haven't, ventured into this philosophical novel sort of books, I think it's this The Stranger book is quite a good starting point. When I first read it, I also had my doubts. But right now, I think I won't read more books of this genre because it was in a way very eye-opening and very I don't know. It hit a chord with me in a way most of the other books haven't.
Yeah, most of the philosophical books that we find are non-fiction, right? So there are not many stories written in a philosophical sense, but this in that way is very different. So Camus' work was very controversial when it first came out. So it's very interesting to read something like that, I guess. Yes.
Yeah. This novel was published in 1942. And Albert Camus was born in French Algeria. And he actually won the Nobel Prize of Literature for this particular fiction at the age of 44 years.
He died also very young too. So
yes, quite a tragedy.
Sad.
Yeah. So it was also also the first book that I read from a Nobel Prize winning author.
Oh wow, really?
Yes. I mean, I so far have been more into, Harry Potter sort of, fiction, very bubbly, adventurous sort of books.
Yeah, all of us are sort of like that, right? We look for such kinds of books, but this is not the kind of story that usually you pick out and read unless someone recommends it to you. So I'm glad I did, kind of. Yeah, sure. So to give a brief introduction, so The Stranger is a story about an Algerian shipping clerk named Merceau who lives in an apartment. So the book starts off with him attending his mother's funeral, and then the writer goes on to describe a certain crime he commits after that, if I'm not to give any spoilers, and the way his prosecution takes place and how his ultimate fate is decided. So it's very mundane in a way, although he commits a huge crime. But the plot line is basically that. So that is a very surface level description of what I think the book is about.
Yes. So when I read this book, this character Merceau was not a regular person that you and I meet in real life. There were certain characteristics in his personality that were very strange for us in a way. I think that is exactly the reason why the author calls this book The Stranger, because Merceau for us is a stranger.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons for that is Camus' portrayal of Merceau is precisely one of those terrible innocents who shock society by not kind of accepting the rules of the society's game, right? So he lives among outsiders, but to them too, he's kind of like a stranger. So that is why some people like him, for example, for his mistress, Mari, who is quite fond of him because he's odd. Right, so the reason for her being fond of him is odd, right? But others, they hate him for the same reason. So that is how he becomes a stranger to the reader, I guess.
Yes. Yeah. So giving minimum spoilers to the listeners, I think we should give a little bit of an incident or two in order to carry on with this discussion. So the first thing about Merceau is that at the beginning of the narration, he attends his mother's funeral, in which Merceau does not display a lot of, sadness or regret or any sort of a negative emotion towards his mother's death. The feeling he has towards his mother's death is more or less indifference.
Yes, it's indifference. So indifference becomes one of the main themes in the book as well, because of the recurring images of the sun and the heat. Right? Yes. So it kind of portrays the kind of indifference that the world has towards each individual. So Merceau is sort of a reflection of that. He himself is indifferent. So yeah, the fact that he does not cry, to me, is very indicative of how we are supposed to behave versus how we choose to behave. Right? Yes. So to me, Amoya, this is the reality. So you can spend days and days immersing yourself in the grief of someone else's death. But the truth is, if you don't wish to commit suicide, of course, you will have to get up the next morning and go to work. Right? So maybe it's not the next day. Maybe you get a week off to sit home and be miserable. But eventually you will have to get along with life. So what Merceau does is, he is getting along with life starting from the very next day. Right? So the real question is, why do we find that strange? Why is it so unacceptable to us? So it's the question we have to ask ourselves. Yeah.
And the second scenario where we can quite experience this difference of Merceau's character is when Merceau commits a crime, which I think it's okay to give a point or two from the plot. Merceau commits a murder. Merceau commits a murder, and he has a trial and everything. This whole other scenario that precedes the murder. But once again, the attitude Merceau has towards his crime and towards his punishment, once again, is indifference.
Yes, exactly. So this sort of leads us to one of the main themes of the novel, actually, right? Yes. Which is existentialism, if we are to talk about it right now.
Yeah, we can begin this philosophical argument from a question I think you and I, as laymen, have at one point in our life have come across, which is, does our life has a meaning at all? If so, how can we find the meaning of our lives? So this particular question has been just like it has been posed to you and I at some point in our lives. This particular question has been bothering people for thousands of years. But we being, creatures of denial, we choose not to find a solution. But there have been philosophers in history who have devoted their entire lives to find a solution for this particular problem. So as the first solution we have in the history, philosophers like Plato or Aristotle, way back in history, have come up with this philosophical argument that we called the essentialism, in which they say that there is a core property that is essential for each and everything and each and every person in this world to be what they are. For an example, a knife. Okay, say a knife. Having a blade and being able to cut something is what makes a knife a knife. So that is what they call the essence. Similarly, they argue that every person even before their birth, have sort of an essence instilled upon these their lives, and that is the purpose that the person has in their lives, which means it's sort of like a God-given. Say I'm born with and God has given me a meaning, and my meaning in life, let's say, is fight against injustice, which means I have to do that.
Yeah, it's kind of like God's plan, right?
Yeah, more or
you
less.
have to go with that. Yeah, right. So yes. So talking about essentialism, of course, like you said, essentialism and absurdism kind of they clash with one another in the novel. So talking about the absurd, for our listeners who are not familiar with the term, the word kind of very much speaks for itself. So have you played Temple Run, Amaya?
Yeah, I have actually, yes.
Yes. So what happens in the end of Temple Run?
Nobody knows, right? You just run and run and run.
Exactly. So, well, it's an endless game, right? So, eventually an obstacle would come out of nowhere, or you'll trip on something, or the demons will take you over, and that will be the end of it.
Yeah.
Right? So in the end, all the coins and gems you collected become useless. So, of course, you can buy upgrades and stuff, but each time you end up running in different locations.
Yes. Oh my God, I never looked at it that way.
Yes, so this is absurdism to me, right? So it is a philosophical theory that says that the world has no intrinsic meaning. So simply speaking, the world is meaningless and has no structural coherence to it whatsoever. So this is the very first theme that we can see in Camus' novel.
Which is exactly the opposite of the essentialism that is brought upon by Plato and Aristotle and people like that.
Yes, very much so. So this leads us to the next thematic element, which is nihilism. Nihilism simply springs from absurdism, right? They are very intertwined, right? So nihilism is the dismissal of religious and moral principles in the initial belief that life is meaningless. So Camus argues that following a religion and having moral principles or living in a sort of structured reality are all pointless, right? Yes. So humans exist in a constant struggle between expectation and reality, and how we want the world to be versus how it really is. And sometimes we realize this absurdity that we live in with certain shocking events that can change your everyday ways of thinking. Right? For instance, your life is constantly disrupted by tragic events, deaths, surprises, failures, and even successes, right? And countless amounts of incidents like that we did not pre-schedule, right? So for Camus, this was the absurd, this very unpredictability of life.
Talking about the history, actually, now this essentialism, which says that you have a God-given sort of meaning in your life, and you have to adhere to the meaning. This has been quite accepted in the society for a very long time. But this absurdism and nihilism and the philosophical schools of thought that came afterwards kind of were embraced by the people somewhere. They say somewhere with this world wars. Let's take World War II for an example. Now, until then, people were more inclined to accept essentialism. But after World War II, people saw so many terrors in the world, like Hiroshima and Nagasaki, so many people dying, and Holocausts and all these crimes committed by Nazis. And when the more people saw so much terror happening in the world, they actually started to question whether if life had a meaning, if all these moral principles and ethics and everything had a meaning, will so much terror be there in the world? Then that is a point, there is a turning point in the world where people actually questioned whether there is a meaning. If there is a meaning, how can this be possible,
Right.
How can so much of terror be possible?
So, so some people, Amaya, they tend to go after, religions. They tend to worship religions in order to get away sort of from this reality. I'm not condemning any religion or anything, but still what Camus questions is whether or not religion has any impact on the things that really happen to us. right?
Yes.
So what's the whole point of doing this? No one knows what happens after
going
death.
back to that example, if religion was true, this was the question people had. If God was true, would God allow this much of destruction, not terror in the world? So
Right,
people actually started to question essentialism.
Afterwards, the logical flow of Camus' philosophy leads us to the solution to this problem, right? So let's say life has no meaning whatsoever, but still there should be some sort of way to get along with it, right?
Yeah, the problem with nihilism and absurdity was that the question it poses about the very basic moral principles, right?
Yes, so even though it questions them, they do not provide any sort of solution, right?
Exactly.
So that was why people did not sort of like this kind of philosophy. But still, in Camus' writing, the theme of existentialism comes next, which is sort of Camus' way of arguing that the only meaning of life is the meaning we give it. Right, even though we don't have any meaning, there are certain meanings that we can give to life, right?
Yes. So there was a quote I found about this existentialism that really hit me hard. We are in a constant search of meaning. You and I, as people, we are looking for a meaning in our lives. We are looking for things that we can do to make ourselves feel meaningful. So people go after religion. People try to find their meanings of love through meanings of life through love, sometimes by fighting for social justice, sometimes through art. The existentialists actually say that any of these things can give life meaning, but in the same time none of them can.
So this is what Merceau does in the novel, basically. From the very beginning of the novel, he has his own method of, behavior, his own method of reacting and, accepting and things like that, right? For instance, if we look at his reaction to his imprisonment and the way he sort of adapts to the prison life and eventually forgets about women, nature, and cigarettes and all the things that he used to love.
Used to enjoy,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, we kind of start to question the rationality of his punishment, right? So this is a very simple philosophy, to be honest. So let's say you are given a punishment of washing dishes, maybe, right, by your mother. So if you start loving the task, if you start loving the soap bubbles that form and the way the ugly plates, turn white and clean once again, it is no longer a punishment, right? Right, it's just something you love to do, right? So once you stop looking at the punishment as a punishment, it just stops being one. You know what I'm saying? So the method he suggests to overcome the absurdity of life is by tying yourself to the absurd and making decisions that sort of fight against and revolt against this condemnation, right? So just like how Merceau revolted and created meaning in his punishment.
Now, the mother gives you the punishment of washing dishes because in her mind, in her definition, washing dishes is a punishment.
Yes.
So, but this notion of a punishment is again a creation of the mother. So, just like that, if you take a person, imprisoned in a jail, a person imprisoning in, a jail is a definition given by yet another human.
Exactly.
So it's not a universal truth. It's just a definition given by another person that if you put a man in jail, that is a punishment. But Merceau decides to look at it, the other way.
Yeah, in his own way, right? So it stops being a punishment right there. So this is all a social construct, Amaya. It's what Camus tries to bring about, like the social construct that we live in, and we sort of try to fix ourselves into it. If we try to look at it in a different way than others, maybe we'll be better off with it, right? So
So the very basic argument of existentialism is that life has no meaning and the only meaning it has is the one you give it. So there was a text by the same author, Albert Camus, which is the Myth of Sisyphus, right?
Yes, exactly. So it is an essay that Camus wrote right after writing The Stranger. So the essay is basically about a Greek mythology. So in this, Sisyphus is condemned by gods to eternally roll a rock up a mountain, right? So which will magically roll back down once he reaches the top. Right, so this is what he will have to do forever and ever and ever. Like, this is the only task that is assigned to him, to roll a rock up, and the rock just falls back down, and he just climbs back down to roll it up again. Right? So, so Camus ends his essay by sort of demanding the reader to imagine that Sisyphus is happy. Right? So it does not necessarily say that he is happy, but it all depends on how we choose to look at it. Right? So in the end, he talks about this very meaninglessness of Sisyphus's life, and how our lives are the same. We sort of go to work and we come back and we eat and we sleep. So this is kind of a very boring cycle, right? So what he tells us is to imagine Sisyphus as a happy person.
Maybe Sisyphus found something to enjoy with about rolling a rock. Maybe.
Yeah, maybe he did, right?
Eventually, it wasn't a punishment to him at all.
Yes,
so I think this is, ironically enough, this is more or less like the lives we lead. I mean, just like you said, we go to work, we eat, and then we come home, we sleep, and then we again wake up to go to work. Yeah. So we are pretty much like Sisyphus rolling the rock uphill, which eventually rolls down. But ironically enough, we find things to be, happy about.
I know, right? So we are kind of existentialists in a way, right?
Trying to give meaning to a meaningless world could give someone an exhilarating freedom. But searching for meaning in a meaningless world might also push someone else into depression. Let's talk about that after this break. Find more episodes of Rummage in Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. So, let's say they say that existentialism gives some people a sense of, exhilarating freedom. And for some people, it's extremely depressing. We can talk about it in two ways. Existentialism basically say that life has no meaning. The only meaning it has is the one you give it. Yes. So for someone who looks at it in a very, in a sense of having an unlimited freedom, the person can actually look at it as, if life has no meaning, then it would imply that all the rules in the world, all the moral principles, everything is just a definition by another person, which means it has no meaning at all. Yeah. So if I decide to give, the worst case, let's take, I want to kill a person. And in my definition, killing a person is not a crime. Okay, so what happens next?
So that's the kind of controversy he discusses in the story as well, because finally, did you think, did you side with Merceau or did you side with the jury?
Okay, that is a hard question. So Merceau has committed the crime. Yeah. And jury is trying to bring him to justice. But I can't quite hate Merceau just because he's a criminal. Yeah. I don't know. Finally, something inside me is quite siding with Merceau.
Yeah. So it's very interesting because we are not sort of flabbergasted by the tragic ending, right? So Merceau finally becomes our absurd hero at the end of the day, right? So he embraces his fate, which is kind of very, at the same time, it's very strange, but still there is some sort of revelation in it, right? We understand that he died a happy man almost. Right? So
yes, he was executed, but he died happy. I mean, how absurd is that?
Yeah, that's very awkward because this is what Camus wanted the reader to feel. In one of his essays, he actually kind of justifies murder I'm not sure if this is the right argument, but still he says only philosophical question that is valid in the world is whether or not someone should or should not commit suicide. Yes, exactly. And he had the same question about killing somebody else. So he asks us, why should I not kill somebody, right? How is it wrong if my definition of it is not a crime? Why should I not do it? So it's it's very deep,
It
but
gives
still
me
it's
chills.
very,
Oh my god.
I know, it's very controversial. And do you know, this is a very interesting fact. So one of these serial murder cases in America, I'm not sure which one, but then again, when the jury asked the criminal, the one who did it, why the reason for doing it, he said in court that Mercer made me do it.
Oh
right?
my god. Oh my god.
So yeah, it's very chilling, but still very, I don't know. That was why Camus was very controversial. People did not like him at first, but still what he says is very true, right?
You and I think everybody who gets a chance to actually see what this absurdism is, at some level at some level they have to admit that this is the truth. But we have a sort of morality that's instilled upon us. It's hard-coded on us. So we try to, deny that this exists. Now, earlier I said that this existentialism gives one person an exhilarating sense of freedom, but in the meantime, it gives someone else depression. So if someone is constantly posed by the question whether or not I have a meaning in this life, or whether or not whatever I'm doing right now is meaningful, that can be sort of depressing. What if everything we do is meaningless, and what if there is nowhere to find meaning?
Yes, so this is a very interesting question. So I'm not sure whether Camus had the idea of bringing up mental health when he first wrote the book. He probably didn't, but albeit the subjects discussed are, as you said, very related to depression, especially existential depression, which is a kind of depression that is diagnosed currently, right? So which is the kind of depression that springs from questioning your existence. So Camus specifically addressed this question of suicide, as I said. The question of suicide is one of the main things that is kind of detachable from conditions like depression. Camus' alternative for suicide, so Camus never really advised on suicide. His alternative was once again existentialist philosophy. So once you start questioning your existence, you should start creating solutions yourself, right?
Exactly.
So the absurd man, particularly let's say Merceau in this case, will not commit suicide, right? He wants to live, right? Without relinquishing any of his certainty, any certainty about the future, without hope, without illusion, without even resignation, but still he just wants to live, right? But also he kind of stares at death, even waits for it, which is with a kind of like fascination that liberates him, right? So what I'm trying to say is, if death is thrown at you, right? Let's say I get a cancer, right? So then I'll probably eventually die, right? So then the death is right in my face. So just like Merceau, we kind of want to look at death in a different perspective. So suicide is not the option, not at all. But instead, Camus leads us towards a much more acceptable solution, which is trying to embrace the tragic, trying to embrace the absurd, right? Embrace the negativity and give your meaning to it.
Let's say, okay, let's boil it down to something very simple, something very tangible that you and I can relate. Let's say I don't believe in the social construct of fashion. Okay, I don't believe in this, frocks and, trousers and everything. I want to wear something different. I don't believe in the social construct of fashion, so I wear something else. Okay, that in my end is justifiable. But then again, the conflict arises when you see other people's reaction to it.
Yes.
Okay, say I come wearing some sort of a, some sort of a undefined dress in front of you, and then you look at my dress and you say, what are you wearing? I mean, what are you wearing? So it makes me questions my belief.
Yeah.
The depression comes from that conflict between what you believe and the question whether what you believe is actually true. So what they advise to someone who have this existential crisis is to eventually find out a way of life which is authentic to you. This existential depression sort of has several stages, as doctors have defined. The first stage is denial, in which they say that I'm sure that I'm not different. I can do what everyone does. So in this case, despite what he or she is accepting, he tries to do what the social constructs impose on him. And then he sort of gets angry about it. I mean, why me? Why does it seem so easy to others, and why does it seem so hard for me? I mean, everybody else is obeying the social constructs. Why does it feel so weird for me? And then they get into bargaining, in which they say, okay, let me try it again. Maybe I can do it the way others do it. And then they get into depression. This is hopeless. I'm a misfit. I will never feel happy, and I will never feel fulfilled. So why should I bother? And then they say, and the next step in this process is the acceptance, in which the person says, I am who I am. And even though it's sometimes, not as easy to be more intense and sensitive than others, I trust my authenticity. I think this, in a way, is exactly what existentialism suggests.
Yeah, exactly.
Living authentically.
Yes, I'll drink to that because here in the book, Merceau is the kind of, he feels like a misfit, right? Maybe he does not even know it, but he is a misfit.
So, exactly. In Camus' word, he has once said that the hero of my book, which is Merceau, the hero of my book is condemned because he does not play the game. The game, I think he refers to the social construct that everybody else is obeying too. Yeah.
So, it all springs from the fact that we are so used to, one particular way of behavior, right? So there is a pattern sort of in our life, crying at funerals and, getting married, feeling sad about certain things. So everything is a social construct that we are expected to follow. So the social behavior actually matters more than the feeling itself, right? So in my opinion, it's not how you behave per se, it's how judgmental the society is actually.
Yes. It has two sides. The way you decide to act upon, and the way the others decide to look at how you act upon something.
Some people read the book in a very different way as well, Amaya. So they read it to them, Merceau is a tragedy, right? So he kind of created his own doom by not being moral, right? So he killed that he killed that man for no reason per se. So having no morals can get you towards destruction. So some people say that what Camus wanted to say was this, but Camus himself denied it. But still, it can be read in that way as well. So finally, Merceau did not have a happy ending anyway, right?
So for me, this book was in a way extremely eye-opening, and in a way, it's a little bit, disturbing as well.
I know.
Because it made me, it made Amaya question her beliefs on these moralities and social constructs and everything. So, is it okay if I pose the same question to you? You as Vishmi, what do you think of existentialism? Would you embrace existentialism? If so, what do you think about, going against all the social constructs? Would you do it, you as a person?
Well, that's
I know it's a hard question.
Yeah, that's a question I want to get a tattoo, but I want to stay at home at the same time, right? It's something like that, right? So exactly. if you want to continue living, I don't think embracing existentialism is the way to go, but still you can to some level you can believe in it, right? You can maybe so for me personally, to answer your question, the book speaks volumes about the fundamental questions in life that we never really ask ourselves, right?
Yes.
So we talk about right and wrong all the time, we talk about success and hard work and everything, but we are sort of programmed since childhood to stay away from negativity, right? So
Yes.
if you're human, I'm sure you might have questioned your existence at least once, right? So,
Yes.
but we are always given the answer, you should not think about it, right?
Yeah.
So instead
Denial.
of avoiding, avoiding these questions, he actually talks about the very negativity that we live with, right? So to speak, we are kind of living in an abyss, not knowing what comes ahead, right?
Yes.
So yeah, I came to that realization after reading this. So yeah, that's why I love it so much.
So, Vishmi, it has been a very nice experience to have you on my show. How was it for you?
Well, thank you very much too. I enjoyed this a lot. I didn't think I would enjoy this as much, but I did. Yeah, and I wish you all the very best in rummaging for future content, if I may. And
Thank you very much.
so for all you readers out there, just keep reading, and trust me, you'll live 1,000 lives in one lifetime.